So this PowerPoint is about the Inspector, and then the Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley. And as you notice, I kind of created a picture there, which is quite a famous picture from the stage production of An Inspector Calls of the Inspector. And inset is a black and white photograph of J.B. Priestley, the writer. I'd like you to be thinking that perhaps the Inspector is J.B. Priestley. Many of J.B. Priestley's views would come out as the Inspector. He's kind of interrogating the upper classes on their behaviour. Now, it would be easier if J.B. Priestley gave himself a character to do this, but I think it's kind of a lot of his views are coming out in the words of the Inspector. Some people think that the Inspector in this play is a sort of a god looking down and judging the characters, that perhaps he's an avenging angel. Someone has come along to put right something that's gone terribly wrong, to get some revenge on the Burlings. Some people say that the Inspector is a much more complicated thing, that is almost like he's all of us, and that we're all judging the Burlings each time they tell us a story about the terrible things that they've done. And then another way to look at it altogether is that the Inspector doesn't really exist because he's a kind of the consciences of the Burlings, that they've conjured him up based on their guilt, based on the things that they feel themselves, and until they all feel guilty, he'll keep turning up. So one of the ways this play works is that conflict is created by the opposition and the antagonism between Mr. Burling and the Inspector. It's a power struggle. You can see I've put some key words and phrases down the middle. I've already used some of them just talking about it. It is about opposition. We have conflicting ideas, which you will have learnt the word protagonist. Now, because this play is called An Inspector Calls, he does something, therefore he's my protagonist. He's the one who drives the action. But we need someone to block him, and the Inspector is blocked by Mr. Burling, not very effectively after a while, but that's certainly what would appear to happen, and by doing that it creates the drama. So that's where our conflict comes, and we get a power struggle between their different ideologies, their different ways of seeing the world. So we need to talk about the both of them having different ideas about the world, and they have different philosophies, and we can use those phrases interchangeably. It doesn't really matter at the minute which one you choose. It's the idea that they have a different way of thinking about the world, and so they're not going to agree on anything. So if you've seen any of the other Inspector Calls videos, this is about finding the quotations that you think you're going to be able to use, and just knowing what you're going to say, which is what I'm trying to help with now. And you can see that I've underlined some of the key pieces that will help you to write about it. So if we think about the Inspector, it begins very politely. It begins as many police inquiries would do, and you can see that I've underlined the bit that says, "If you don't mind." He's basically telling the Burlings what's happened and what's happened to Eva Smith, but that politeness is there to unsettle them. They are expecting to deal with a normal police officer, somebody who they feel they are superior to. But then we start getting the stage directions, and they're very important in this play. The way that the Inspector begins coolly looking hard at him. There's something deliberate and focused and determined about him. He's not someone to be messed with. And we realise that he doesn't talk like they notice this as well, that he doesn't talk like a policeman when he says things like, "It's better to ask for the earth than to take it." Because what they realise is he's judging them. He's saying that they are people who take whatever they want, that they are greedy and that they take whatever they want. And then we have a little joke. It's not supposed to be that funny, but he says, "I don't play golf." And that's really the Inspector setting himself apart. He's basically saying, not only do I not play golf, but I have nothing in common with any of you people. Golf is used as a sort of symbol of what the richer upper classes get up to in their leisure time, and he's basically saying, I don't do that. So it's a nice little quote to prove that he believes himself to be different from them. But then he does more of this kind of moralising, this idea that he knows better and that he knows about right and wrong. When he talks about Eva Smith's death, he says, "A nice little promising life there, I thought, and a nasty mess someone's made of it." So we've got a nice promising life and we've got a nasty mess, and he's blaming them. He doesn't say so, but he is. And that's him, an example of him being judgmental, and he's moralising. he continues this, and he says his job is quite difficult sometimes because things are ambiguous. He says, I wouldn't know where to draw the line between respectable citizens and criminals. And he's looking at the Burlings and he's kind of suggesting that he doesn't know. He doesn't know which is the criminal and which is the citizen who's respectable. They're pretending to be respectable, but actually he knows way more about them than they think he does. I'd like to keep remembering, the inspector never asks a question that he doesn't already know the answer to. He doesn't need an answer, he wants to know if anyone is prepared to tell the truth. If you look further at the bottom, you can see that he begins to try to help them with what he wants. He says, you see, we have to share something. Now, given that we've had community and all that nonsense, bees in a hive and so on, sharing is not something that comes natural to the Burlings. So it's going to be difficult. But he talks of their guilt. He says, we'll have to share our guilt. Notice he includes himself in that. But really, he's talking about the behaviour of this particular family and their treatment of the working class. Okay. He then has a go at Mr. Burling. He speaks very sharply. He says, your daughter isn't living on the moon. Burling is trying to protect his daughter from hearing about some of these things, and he wants Burling to be realistic. She's not living on the moon. So this shows how he's trying to control what's happening in the house. And then he comes up against Mrs. Burling. And you see the quote I've underlined there, as it says, I think you did something terribly wrong. That's a pretty bold statement to say to someone like Mrs. Burling, who considers herself a seriously important figure in society. So to hear this from a policeman would upset her greatly. But the inspector is not to be put off, and so he's very deliberate when he says that. And he then goes about being very clear indeed when he says, she lies with a burnt out inside on a slab. Don't stammer and yammer at me again, man. Look how differently he's speaking now compared to the first couple of things he says. At the beginning we have, if you don't mind, polite, just checking that it's okay. Don't stammer and yammer at me again, man. Not Mr. Burling, but man. As if they're equals, as if they are. He's speaking to him as an equal who he's going to shut up, basically. He doesn't want him to talk anymore, so he's in control. The inspector is completely in control. And so, as part of the, if you can see, he's there to call them all to judgment, to make them all aware of what they did. So he has his speeches, and he starts one of them with, each of you helped to kill her. Now that's no understatement, or it's no mean thing to say, and he basically details how each one was involved. And he insists that they remember it, that they never forget. That's because this is a lesson. He's trying to teach them a lesson. If you want to think carefully, this is J.B. Priestley talking to his audience. He wants everybody to understand that they have a responsibility for the people they live alongside in society. And then we get our famous speech, and I've just picked a few things out of it. This is his, what you call a parting speech, one that he's off. He leaves the stage and we don't see him again. He talks about millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us. That's the idea of the working classes, the people that we need to look after. This idea that we don't live alone, we're members of one body, absolutely opposite of Arthur Burling's philosophy of life. He believes that we do live alone. We have our family and we protect them, and that's it. So we have these opposing philosophies, and it's this locked conflict between these two groups. But then he leaves with his warning, doesn't he? If men will not learn that lesson, and if you go back a few quotations, you can see, don't stammer and yammer again at me, man. And then he says, if men will not learn that lesson, he means them. And he's trying to teach them a lesson right here. He says that they're going to be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. That should say blood and anguish. It looks like it says I'm bloody and anguish. However, he then says good night and he walks out. That last one is about revolution. It's about the idea that you can change or you will suffer. And I need you to remember that the inspector is here to teach lessons. And that last quotation is a really good example of how he leaves them to do it. He doesn't even wait to know whether they have or not. He believes he's done his work and it's up to them to change. He's not interested in their answer. He's interested in their actions. And sadly for them, their actions are that only 50%, if that, of the family accepts their responsibility. And because they don't, by the end of the play it looks like we're going to go round again, and the inspector calls once again. Perhaps next time they will learn their responsibilities and they will all agree that they've been terrible, and maybe he doesn't need to call.